In focus over the past 3 months across the Middle East, Islamic State has suffered a string of battlefield defeats. The latest is in Raqqa, Syria. U.S.-backed Syrian forces have captured the Islamic State's last urban stronghold in that country, ending 3 years of ISIS rule there. The collapse of Raqqa follows the liberation of Mosul, Iraq in July, and other smaller victories against Islamic State. But U.S. officials say there are still thousands of ISIS fighters that need to be defeated in Iraq and in Syria.
Across the board in the combined joint operations area, so in both Iraq and in Syria, we estimate the number of enemy forces that still remain to be about 6,500 enemy forces, ISIS forces.
So what does the rollback of Islamic State territory mean for the broader fight against ISIS? To discuss this, we'd like to welcome Matthew Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Security Studies Group. And Matthew, let's start with that question. What does it mean in terms of the overall battle against Islamic State?
Well, the battle, it's been on its last legs for quite some time. This day was going to come, and now they're going to be pushed into Dar al-Zor. And I guess from the U.S. perspective, notwithstanding the Iran policy speech on Friday, it seems that the United States is quite content to let the Russians and the Syrians and Iranians deal with it. ISIS will be back because the conditions are still the same. When you have Iran now on the ascendancy because no one, and specifically the United States, hasn't been leading a coalition to push back at them at the same time, everything that's been going bad for ISIS has turned up positive for Iran. So the same areas, we're talking Western Iraq and Eastern Syria, well, large portions of Syria, the Sunni population is still going to be dispossessed. You're going to see what you've seen out of the Kurds in northern Iraq, and it's going to be very much sectarian breakdown still amongst the religion aspect. So ISIS will still gain recruits, not to the extent that it did before, but it still will find fertile ground in the Middle East. It just probably won't look as enticing to the outside world if you're sitting in Europe, that you're not going to go join a caliphate, which I have to say, if you are pledged to that form of Islam, if an actual caliphate is declared, you're obliged religiously to go, and join it. So if there isn't one, that's a problem for them.
Well, in places like Europe, does this mean greater challenges, perhaps, and security threats, given that so many people, instead of going to the Middle East, where ISIS is losing ground, may now decide to follow the instructions to carry out terror attacks at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine that those would be, on the rise. But also, I think Europe is in for a bit of a shock that these refugees, they're not just going to turn around and go home. The conditions are still horrible from where they came from. Nothing indicates that anything would change. It would still be to their detriment. And, when the international cameras turn off of their coverage because Western powers aren't involved there, the score settling will be quite intense. Even though I have to say this, the past few years have definitely, taken the bar down a notch, several notches, as far as what the world is apparently willing to live with as far as cruelty and, horrible images daily on a TV screen.
Matthew Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
And now a look beyond stateside in our global roundup. In Malta,